This is a relay project.
The Discourse starts right now with Cheryl Oates and Erica Barudis.
Welcome back to The Discourse. We're going to jump right into it today. What is Danielle Smith thinking? Premier Smith has agreed to appear with Tucker Carlson, who's coming to Calgary in January. And before Erica jumps in to give us a little insight into why the Premier would do this, for anyone who doesn't know who Tucker Carlson is, he is a right-wing commentator who has openly pushed bigoted, racist commentary, supports the invasion of Ukraine, and was fired because he was too extreme for Fox News. Erica, too extreme for Fox News, but not too extreme for Danielle Smith. What is going on here?
Well, I see that we're coming into episode spicy and hot and geared up to go there, Cheryl. So, you know what? I had kind of all the feels. I think we're going to play a clip first from question period to kind of explain where the government and the opposition is coming from. So I will bite my tongue until then.
But now on January 24th, the Premier will proudly sit down with Tucker Carlson, who's praised Vladimir Putin. He's insulted the president of Ukraine, and he's promoted the debunked conspiracy theory that Ukraine was producing biological weapons. The Premier is lending the credibility of her office to this debunked conspiracy theorist. Why?
Yeah. The Honourable the Premier. Mr. Speaker, I take every opportunity to tell the Alberta story. I speak with members from the media, I speak with podcasts, and I ensure that we are able to tell the world that Alberta is leading the entire world on reducing emissions as well as developing our energy. So I'm going to take those opportunities, unlike the member opposite who kicks people from the press gallery out of her press conferences and who refuses to talk to people across the spectrum. I think this is an opportunity for us to make sure people know the story.
Erica, before you jump into this, I just have to say that Danielle Smith has this incredible gift for saying things, no matter how outrageous, sometimes factually inaccurate, with like the calmest, the coolest face and voice I have ever seen. It is an absolute gift for a politician.
Well, I think she did a good job answering the question. I couldn't stop looking at Raki. Her facial expressions, as you say that Danielle Smith is calm, Raki was all the emotions. When it came to me this week, when that came out, I also had a journey of emotions. At first, when I saw it come out and kind of some of the immediate opposition comments, immediate media response to it, I went back to where I was a political staffer of what are the 8 things that could go wrong here, and getting super nervous and starting to play those through.
Only 8?
Yeah, I like even numbers, and I didn't want to. 10 sounds too high. So all the things, as a political staffer, you're playing through all of those scenarios, and I started thinking about it. And then I actually started thinking about when I was in the Premier's office, and she had just taken office, and she wanted to do Jordan Peterson. And, same thing, was well, how are we really going to play this? What is the benefit? And the answer then, which is the answer now, was these people have huge audiences. I don't support everything that they believe in. I am using this as a platform for Alberta and to drive our narrative to large audiences internationally. And then she, went on the show, had a really great dialogue, actually challenged him on some of his thoughts and beliefs. And that's where her journalist background comes out, and where she's able to use any medium to drive the Alberta narrative.
On its premise, I think that sounds reasonable. But for this show particularly, I just cannot imagine that the people tuning in to watch Tucker Carlson or to listen to Tucker Carlson are tuning in to have their minds changed. Danielle Smith says she's going to go on the show, talk about how climate policy and industrial policy are inextricably linked. I just don't think you're going to change a lot of minds. And I don't think that this is necessarily the audience that, thinking of all the things that a premier has in her inbox in terms of invites, this cannot be priority number one. I just can't believe that we're actually making progress for Alberta by Danielle Smith going on this show.
But I don't think it has to be priority one. I think driving the Alberta message is a huge priority. There's obviously lots going on here. But whether it's number one, number two, number three, I don't think is relevant. I would say the biggest thing that we have to look at is she using this platform for a constructive way and a constructive opportunity to drive the message. He's coming here. He's coming to Alberta soil. Why not use the opportunity to drive the narrative? And so I'm now in a place where at first I was like, oh, Lordy. And now I'm in a place where I'm like, oh, I totally...
You're buying tickets.
I did buy a ticket. Thank you very much. Great little call out there. I know now our texting threads can be used online. But no, honestly, like I'm going to go, and I actually, I don't agree with a lot of things Tucker Carlson says, but I want to hear what he has to say, and I want to see how our premier reacts.
Well, I will not be going.
Shocking.
Partly because I completely agree with what the NDP has said, which is that using the office of the premier completely legitimizes positions that are offensive, that are completely inaccurate in some cases, and in lots of cases actually dangerous. And I don't think that it is ethical for the premier to legitimize those positions and this person's platform by attaching the office of the premier to it. And in addition to that, I also think this is just not a good reflection on Alberta. Whatever progress Danielle Smith feels she's going to make in terms of convincing people that climate and industry are inextricably linked, whatever progress she believes she's making is going to be countered by the fact that what people are going to see is the premier of a province sitting down with Tucker Carlson. And I think that reflects more poorly on Alberta's reputation than anything she could possibly say.
Yeah, and I take two things from everything this week. First off, I recognize that you're saying that she's the premier and using the premier's office. If Rachel Notley was elected, she used to turn media away. She wouldn't talk to people. I would rather have a premier that talks to everyone. Danielle Smith acknowledged it. The premier acknowledged it in her comments in the House. That was like, well, I wouldn't talk to CBC if I didn't do media that I didn't agree with their values and beliefs. So, is it better to have a premier that's going to hide and scour from the media or ignore media in their press conferences? Or is it better to let someone use freedom of the press, freedom of speech, and actually leverage this for an opportunity? The second thing is, I think society, we're all in each other's houses a little too much. If you don't like him, you don't want to see him, don't pay to have a ticket. The premier's there. You don't want to hear it? Cool. Like, you do you.
We'll still pay the price. Those of us who aren't going to attend Tucker Carlson, who aren't going to watch the show, are still going to pay the price when there's a blemish on Alberta's reputation because we're seen to have given him a platform, and we're seen to have promoted him, in many cases maybe seen to have aligned with him. That is a detriment for all Albertans. And it's not like you can just look away and pretend it wasn't here and it doesn't happen.
And see, and I think you're overplaying it. You're very much like catering to the opposition on that, where really, like, I've seen the entire week on how this has played out. It wasn't more than a one-day news cycle. It's not coming up as much, just, basically the political rhetoric of the opposition driving this narrative. Again, she did Jordan Peterson, potentially deemed a contentious individual. There was no real fallout of what she said or any pushback, besides someone standing up in the House needing to ask a question.
Well, I think some of this is because she's been buoyed by an AGM that was filled with members who represent the more socially conservative, more right-wing sect of the party. Buoyed by that, she's going to keep doing things that make that part of the party happy. But before we get to the UCP AGM, which we've talked a little bit about, but we'll jump into more of the detail of because you were there, we have to thank our sponsor, because none of this would be possible without our sponsors. And California Closets offers beautiful, functional designs for all of your organizational needs. They do closets, they do office spaces, they do Murphy beds and entertainment centers. My next door neighbors actually did their entire kitchen with California Closets, and it is incredible. Custom built storage that is exactly where you want it and what you want it for, shaped perfectly for pots, pans, dishes, appliances. Honestly, as someone who is constantly frustrated when I'm cooking, what more could you possibly ask for? For more information, log on to californiaclosets.ca.
I'm back. I'm ready.
Do you want to tell audio listeners, podcast listeners, what you just did?
I took off my headphones to put on a hat that reads "More Alberta, Less Ottawa." because that was actually the merchandise at the UCP AGM. I didn't get there in time to get my sweatshirt because they were sold out. So I'm rocking a hat today.
So what is the U.S. has MAGA and we have Mallow?
Well, you can try to make that a thing, Cheryl.
Super catchy.
I'll let you go for that.
The MAGA of the North. Thanks, Erica. That says a lot about this past weekend.
I can't hear you over my hats, but I assume you said something snarky. No, getting into the AGM, I think a lot of people have seen the record turnout, 3,800 people, regardless of your political stripe. That's a pretty impressive gathering of people. Yes, lots of different policies came forward. Obviously, where media's biting at the chomp is on some of the policies that came forward that are more socially conservative of nature. And I think we're going to play a clip of the premier, the leader of the UCP's address on Saturday afternoon. Right now.
We cannot have a successful province or a successful society without strong and nurturing families. And regardless of how often the extreme left undermines the role of parents, I want you to know that parental rights and choice in your child's education is and will continue to be a fundamental core principle of this party and this government, and we will never apologize for it.
So that was on the Premier's address on mentioning parental rights. Obviously, during her address, she covered a lot of things, lots of standing up to Ottawa, as my sweet hat references. And our energy sector, combating Trudeau, focusing on the economy. But what I think we're going to dig into is why we're seeing more social potentially issues come forward. And I'll let you jump in after, but I want to just say, I've been thinking about this. I know we talked about this on the Ryan Jesperson Real Talk show earlier this week. And I was trying to think of the why. Why are these issues coming up? And I believe it's a response. We talked about parental rights. Why is it an issue? Why would the Conservatives bring this forward? And it's actually in response to what's happening in our society. So what's happening in the classroom, what is happening with preferential treatment, things like that across the board. And why these social policies are coming forward is there's a lot of the wokeism that we've seen over the last several months, and this huge pendulum swing that I think was bigger than anyone thought it was going to be. We're all walking on eggshells now. We're all feeling like we don't know what's appropriate, what's politically correct. And these motions or resolutions that came forward, I think, are a part of addressing that. So is it because of who the membership is? No, I think it's society. And as a result, being the members of the UCP bringing these resolutions forward to combat a lot of the stuff we're seeing in society.
Well, I think it's very hard to say that this was not a room filled with social conservatives. This was not a room filled with the further right section of the UCP. And that, honestly, a lot of moderate conservatives were not reflected in either the crowd or the resolutions passed, or frankly, the board elections that happened over the weekend. Now, I'm not claiming to be a UCP insider. I wasn't at the convention over the weekend, but if you look at the resolutions passed, if you look at the moments that people cheered during the speech, this is not a moderate group. This is a group that has moved far further right than what was represented during the election. Is that fair?
I don't know if it's fair. I would say the two standing ovations, one being significantly larger, was on parental rights. There was let's call it a mini standing ovation on healthcare reforms. I don't believe that that's necessarily maybe put in the box of the traditional version of a social conservative, or what's more commonly looked at as a social conservative. For example, I don't think a lot of people would paint me with the brush of being, a social conservative. I supported the parental
Twitter
rights.
comments are going to light up for that.
I just fed that in. But really, where I identify within the party is probably not on the social conservative side, or those are, and not to say that I don't, again, agree with some things or understand some things that are coming from that part of our party or respect those items that are coming from our party, but where my values and beliefs lie are not necessarily there. But I support parental rights. So does that make me a SoCon? I don't think so. I think it just means that like I'm really sick of, people not respecting the rights of parents, not, things happening in a classroom where parents aren't told things. So I don't think you can say that that's like painting me with a brush because of me supporting some of these policies.
Okay, but I'm going to paint you with that brush because I am disgusted by this policy. Like, I just think I think it's gross. I think it's leveraging a group of people who are already marginalized, who are already in danger, and using that leverage for political gain, for dog whistle politics, for crowds like you saw at the UCP AGM over the weekend. And I think it's not just politics. We're putting real lives at risk by having these conversations, by implementing policies like this. And I just think it's gross. I don't think it's in the best interest of all Albertans. And I absolutely do think it's possible to protect parental rights and make sure that marginalized kids, that trans kids are safe at school and are safe at home. And I think it's false for the UCP not to say that.
But they're not saying that. They're not saying that it's not about protecting a small majority that can't talk to their parents. It's about the large majority in which a government makes decisions based on. You make a decision.
No, but you're taking that
majority.
Protection away. You're taking those rights away.
But what about the rights
in
of
Saskatchewan?
Parents on the
We've
other
watched
side?
a judge has ruled that those kids have rights, and by passing policy like this, you're taking those rights away.
But what are the rights of parents
you are
that
taking
brought
the
the children
away.
into the world?
Yeah, and absolutely, it's a balance, but that's why policies exist. And that's why we have so much trust in teachers to have these careful conversations and navigate these really delicate situations with teachers, with the students themselves, and with parents. But just coming out and saying, we are going to make sure that every child is reported on, that does put kids at risk.
But point to me why we should put the onus on teachers. What training do they have? What expertise? I mean, stats show a lot of teachers don't stay within the profession for more than 10 years. So you're talking, let's say, around like a 28-year-old. They might not be a parent. They might not have, any type of experience in navigating things like this. They may not have been exposed to it. So why are we having the teachers make decisions for students and allowing to make a decision on behalf of a student without informing the parent? Like, to me, I get that there's a small percentage that that is concerned about something like this. But I think there's a lot of parents, if they knew or their kids had the school tell, they would have a very welcoming and honest conversation in their households, and their parents would be supportive and love them. So this is about protecting the majority and coming forward with what is, I think a lot of people can say, is that parents have their kids' best interest at heart. And there is a very, small, again, I don't want to overstretch of like how small or anything like that. I don't want to depreciate those individuals that don't feel safe, but I think that there's better ways to put into the system, ways for those children to be able to navigate that than putting the onus on teachers and keeping the parents in the dark.
And I'm hesitant to even dive into like the details of this policy because I think the policy itself is a complete wedge issue designed not to protect parental rights. It's not, even though essentially that's what it does, not intended to keep anybody safe. It's intended to whistle to those people, like those who were in attendance at the UCP AGM, and say, here's an issue you care a lot about that we can all rally behind. And that's the way that you get people to turn out in the numbers that you saw over the weekend, is they need an issue that they care about. And for the UCP, especially the far right sect of the UCP, this is that issue. But the problem is that as you go down this road, you start to lose the moderate people. You start to lose the people who maybe were on the fence in Calgary during the last election, but voted UCP because that was where they were most comfortable. You start to lose the more urban voters who don't align with the social conservative side of the UCP, and you start to see your numbers move. And that's exactly what we've seen in polling, the most recent polling that came out this morning from Ledger, which shows the UCP has lost support since the election, and the NDP has actually gained support. And most of that gain has come from an increase in Calgary, where I think you could say a lot of the UCP's more moderate voters are sitting.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. I want to talk about the polling and recognizing that, the UCP has gone down a few points. In a first year of a mandate, it's not surprising. I want to make it clear to the viewers that the poll we're talking about is the Leger poll, and that it is, it is sampled before the UCP AGM. So I don't think it's fair to tie those two together and say that, hers immediately after her speech points were lost.
Yeah, for sure.
On the social issues, trust me, as a conservative, we hate talking about those wedge issues. They don't help us. They don't help move the narrative. We don't sit there twiddling our thumbs being like, what crazy wedge issue can we come up with? Like, that's going to be confrontational. And like, especially when you're government.
Totally don't believe you.
No, it's true. I mean, we don't want to talk about it because, again, like, those are things that can come up on the policy floor. Those are things that you can debate within your party. But those aren't necessarily the things where like, you know what, take that one home. But where this whole policy started is because that is happening in classrooms, and it is getting pushback from parents feeling like they are being kept in the dark from, what's happening with them at school. And so we didn't pick this issue. We're solving an issue that was created by individuals and something that parents were upset about. We heard that loud and clear, and then it came through a party motion. I don't know what the government is going to do with this, honestly. I don't know the process of if it's legislation, if they just talk about their values and beliefs, because they have done a lot to the Education Act on ensuring that parental choice in education and parental rights are within that legislation. So I don't know what that means from what comes out of it. But I do want to get back to the poll because, you could always sit there and be like, oh, the leader's down points or the government's down points. In the first year of a mandate, that's actually quite reasonable. This is like in politics, we all know the 4-year cycle, but for the listeners, year one is a lot of tough decisions. Year 1 and 2 is where you're really cleaning house. You're trying to do a lot of changes and reforms, as I know we're going to talk about AHS reforms. And so you're making a lot of the tough decisions, and then you get kind of back into like, okay, now you have proof about what those decisions, how those decisions impacted Albertans, and then you go into an election year. I mean, you guys brought in a carbon tax in your first go. Tough decision.
No impact on polling numbers whatsoever.
Well, I mean, that's one issue, but for a leader, no, that's fair. I was like, I don't know, I didn't check, but 1 or 2 years are tough decisions. The other thing is that Rachel Notley has kind of disappeared, right? And there's, after the election, I think there's a lot of apathy that, the leader of the opposition, if they're not coming out guns a-blazing, it might be like quite a bit of a relief. You're not hearing politics all the time. And so I'm not surprised that the NDP gain traction. Like, sometimes people don't want to hear from politicians. And when you don't hear from Rachel Notley, maybe that's a good thing for her. That's what I took from that one.
Well, that is straight out of the UCP playbook for sure, because that was Danielle Smith's strategy during the campaign. Like, it was the less she talks, the better her numbers will be. That is certainly not Rachel Notley's strategy. You did win. It's certainly not Rachel Notley's strategy. And I would say if you've been watching closely this week, and especially for those political nerds watching QP, those guns have been blazing this week. And I think that ability to hold the government accountable and the ability to raise really good questions about some of the decisions the government is making is well respected through the province, and certainly respected in cities where you saw the NDP make major progress like Calgary. And so I think that is more likely why you're seeing those opinions move, is because 1, the NDP is doing a great job of being an incredibly professionalized opposition, and 2, Danielle Smith saying a bunch of stuff that they don't like.
Based on the heckling that I hear during QP, I'm not sure if professionalism is the word I'd use. But anyways, I do think like there's going to be more polling. I can't wait till we dissect what happens kind of after the field of this AGM in the first few weeks of session to see where, the mark is being hit by the government or being missed with future polls. Speaking of insightful resources on how to navigate the Alberta landscape, our next sponsor is the Pocket Lobbyist, where they help you understand political risk as business risk, and you can rid yourself of the idea that lobbying is a bad word. Pocket Lobbyist is the first of its kind subscription-based platform to help organizations anticipate, interpret, and mitigate political risk in Alberta. A woman-founded, self-funded startup created by a professional lobbyist, this platform has all of the tools you need to effectively lobby the government in Alberta. Pocket Lobbyist is offering our listeners 2 months free if you sign up before December 31st. Go to pocketlobbyist.com using the code DXPmonthly.
Very well executed, Erica.
Thank you. I had to multitask with the screens. It's a new challenge.
Can't say the same for the government this week as they announced a complete overhaul, another complete overhaul to Alberta's healthcare system.
I think the word reform would be more appropriate. But I mean, if anyone is surprised that this happened, you have not been paying attention to Danielle Smith for the last year and a half. She talked about it before she was running for leader, about the healthcare crisis we're facing, about the need for reform, on how like the super board or AHS hasn't been working for Albertans. All of these things. She campaigned on it in her leadership. She talked about it and executed removing, the AHS board in her first 90 days. Like the fact that people are at a, oh my gosh, this happened is surprising to me, even if you don't follow it like we do. So, this week's announcement of appointing a new board is step one, or step two, I guess, because they're removing the official administrator, putting in a board in place, which is made up of several deputy ministers. And I had to ask a few questions about that one because that's not traditional. But you're seeing a few deputy ministers come over, and that is because of the cross-ministry impact. Now, this board is not the permanent board, and I think that was something that I had to read between the lines in the government announcement. I probably would have led with it of this is, to address the critical needs that we're facing on emergency services, on wait times, on, a lot of the things like access to family doctors, working with them on a new payment plan of like what that looks like so that we can ensure we're recruiting enough family doctors. That is what this board is focused on, is some of those critical needs. And then they're also going to look alongside the Department of Alberta Health and Alberta's health services on how to move forward.
So I guess you want to hear why I don't like it.
No, I'm fine to keep talking. Just kidding. Go ahead.
Just end it there. Well, I think we can all agree that change needs to come to Alberta Health Services. It needs to come to the way that people can access the system, and it needs to come to the way the chaos that is currently existing in Alberta Health Services needs to be solved. We have long said the system is in crisis. I don't mean we as in the NDP. I mean we as Albertans have long felt that the system is in crisis. And so, yes, the government needs to do something about it, but concentrating the power over healthcare decision-making on the political side, in the Premier's office, in the Minister's office, is so incredibly dangerous. The Premier is not a doctor. In fact, in another life, she recommended hydrochloroquine as a COVID cure. This is not a doctor. She should not be guiding healthcare decisions. And I think Albertans should be worried that power, that oversight, does not sit with a medical professional. It sits with a politician. I think that could be a really dangerous situation. In addition to that, this is a huge lift. It's an incredibly expensive lift. It creates more chaos in an already chaotic system, and it does absolutely nothing for the biggest problem Albertans are facing right now, which is access to a family doctor. Like, where, I know there's a line in there that says we'll get you more doctors, but where are they coming from? How are we recruiting? How are we adding more frontline workers to the system? Because that, to me, is the biggest problem. And creating 4 new organizations, I don't see any solution to that issue.
Okay, before I give my 2 cents on that response, one thing that I haven't seen is the opposition actually providing a solution, right? It's this is bad, this is horrible, we agree. I think the area where we agree is that the current healthcare crisis, it needs to be addressed. And this isn't just Alberta specific, that's nationwide. So I don't think we're the only ones in this. I appreciate that the UCP is taking bold and robust changes. If you think back to when AHS became a thing, Ed Stelmach was not getting praises left, right, and center. There was a lot of pushback. There was a lot of angst about what was happening, because that's what happens when you're making big change. And so I think that's what we're witnessing right now. And now everyone's like, well, why are we moving away from it? Like it's people will never like change. But to have impactful, meaningful policy and decisions come forward, you sometimes got to be real bold. And I think that's what this government's doing.
Okay, but like, what have we seen so far that would make Albertans confident in the idea that this government has what it takes to completely overhaul? Like, and it is, you can say reformed, it is a complete overhaul of Alberta's healthcare system, given that their one effort to reform one of the pieces of the healthcare system in lab services was a disaster that they've had to walk back. In a second case, we had the premier step in to take bold action to give families access to children's medication at a time of incredible shortage. Don't know where that shipment is. It hasn't cleared customs yet on the way from Turkey, but it wasn't a solution that had any follow through in terms of fixing the problems of the healthcare system. I think their record speaks for itself. And I think that makes Albertans worried that something on this scale that has this kind of implications, where there wasn't even any consultation with Alberta doctors or frontline workers, that's worrisome. Like at the very least, that's worrisome.
So you just said, I want to pick on something you just said, or pick up on something you just said, is like the consultation. If you look at what came out, there's 25 stakeholders that came up and supported it. You saw the news conference. Like, I mean, I just want to reference a list.
But where were the doctors?
There was, let's see, Health Cities. We've got Covenant Health. We've got Yellowhead County. We've got
you had the former Conservative premier. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, but he was the one that brought in AHS and now is talking about going to local authorities. Like, that's kind of his legacy, to stand up there and be like, no, it's not right for this time, I think is a good point. And his entirety, Alberta Cancer Foundation, Alberta Continuing Care. What else do we got here? We've got, the pharmacists or the paramedics were there. And AMA was there. We had Dr. Paul Parks, the president of AMA. So doctors were there. I think that this is one of the critical needs, is they have talked about needing to work with family physicians to get them in. You still haven't answered my question about the solution that the NDP would bring forward. So I'm all happy to end there with you're solving all of our health problems.
The NDP put forward a pretty thorough healthcare plan during the election that was aimed first at properly funding the system and making sure that we had the doctors that we need so that every single Albertan had access to a family doctor. Not just saying that, but rolling out a plan that would get us to the point where everyone could access a family doctor. In the plan that was rolled out yesterday, I see it as a talking point, but I saw nothing concrete that would lead to Albertans having a family doctor. And so I think the NDP has rolled out a plan. It's rolled out solutions, and this isn't even close.
Well, you said properly fund. We are the highest funded healthcare system in the country with the worst record. So what I hear is we're going to throw money at what we think is the problem, is of actually looking at the root cause. And so we will probably agree to disagree on this segment, and I'm sure we'll have lots of health talk for time to come. But that the biggest thing is our healthcare system is in crisis. I think it needs significant transformation, and whether you're standing here saying the transformation is from the NDP's approach of more funding, or the UCP approach, which is a pretty aggressive, robust, and bold approach, which we'll have to see how it rolls out. But I like where they're heading. We're getting away from AHS that was focused on hospitals and acute care, and focusing on what I think we can both agree on is needed, is patient-centric healthcare.
You just shock me by saying you think they're heading in a good direction. Breaking news,
it's been one day.
Erica supports the UCP's plan.
And Cheryl wants to throw money at the healthcare problem.
Unfair comparison. But before we wrap up today, we just wanted to say a huge thank you to everyone who has listened, watched, and downloaded the first 2 episodes of The Discourse. We have had so much incredible feedback, so many comments, so many direct messages, both compliments and constructive criticism and show ideas. So we just want to encourage you to keep it coming.
Yeah, I want to thank all the people that asked us to be a little punchier. Apparently, we were very polite to each other. So hopefully this episode was a little bit spicier. But yes, we want to hear from you. If you have any questions, comments, or segment ideas, please send them to us. We are on socials, so on Instagram and X. Shoot us a DM with anything you want us to cover, or leave a comment, and then make sure you subscribe to however you heard us today. That's it for our show. We'll see you guys next week.
The Discourse is hosted by Cheryl Oates and Erica Barudis. Follow on Instagram @The Discourse Pod. Subscribe to The Discourse on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts.